They say you can't smell anything underwater. That's a lie. You can smell the ozone from your welding torch. You can smell the rubber of your mouthpiece. And when things go really bad, you can smell the copper taste of your own fear in the back of your throat. My name is Elias. I'm a commercial diver. I fix the things nobody wants to look at. Sewage pipes, bridge pilings, ship hulls. It's dark, it's cold, and it pays enough to make you forget you might die every time you jump in. It was a Monday, 9 a.m. I was 30 feet down in the harbor, working on the starboard propeller of a cargo ship called the Iron Lady. The water was murky, the usual harbor brown. Visibility was maybe 5 feet. I had my arc welder in hand, laying a bead on a stress fracture. The bright white light of the arc was the only thing I could see, flashing against the dark silt. Everything was normal. My comms were crackling with the boredom of my topside tender. A kid named Mikey. "Hey Elias," Mikey chirped in my ear. "Weather service says there's a storm rolling in. Big green clouds. Looks nasty." "Copy that, Mikey," I grunted, adjusting my buoyancy. "Long as it doesn't stir up the current, I don't care if it rains frogs. Let me finish this weld." I went back to work. Zzzt. Zzzt. But about 10 minutes later, the light changed. 3 minutes and 30 seconds. Usually, even at 30 feet, you get some ambient sunlight filtering down. It's a dull, grey-blue glow. But suddenly, the water dimmed. It turned a sickly, bruised shade of yellow. And then, the sound started. Underwater, rain usually sounds like a gentle static, like sand hitting a drum. This was different. This sounded like gravel. It was a heavy, violent drumming on the surface, 30 feet above me. "Mikey!" I keyed the mic. "Sounds like a hell of a downpour up there. You guys dry. Static." "Mikey, check in." Nothing. Just a low, electronic hum. I figured the storm messed with the radio signal. It happens. I decided to finish the last 2 inches of the weld. That's when I felt the burn. I was wearing a dry suit, a heavy vulcanized rubber suit designed to keep me completely sealed off from the water. But I felt a tingling on my neck, right where the latex neck dam seals against my skin. It felt like a mosquito bite. Then it felt like a bee sting. Then it felt like a cigarette burn. "Damn it," I hissed, reaching up to adjust the seal. I looked at my hand. I was wearing heavy neoprene gloves, reinforced with Kevlar. The blue rubber of the glove was smoking. Tiny ribbons of grey smoke were rising from my knuckles, spiraling up into the water. I blinked. Smoke? Underwater? Then I realized it wasn't smoke. It was chemical dissolution. The rubber was dissolving into the water. I looked around. The murky brown water wasn't brown anymore. It was clouding up with a milky white haze. A fish, a striped bass, maybe 10 pounds, drifted past my face mask. It wasn't swimming. It was floating sideways. And it had no skin. The flesh was raw, pink, and falling off the bone in wet clumps, dissolving into the current like sugar in hot tea. My heart slammed against my ribs. Topside. I screamed. "Emergency! Abort dive! Pull me up! Now!" No answer from Mikey. But the tether, the thick umbilical cord that supplied my air and communications, jerked. It didn't pull me up. It went slack. It drifted down past my helmet, the severed end frayed and bubbling. My air supply was cut. I didn't panic. You panic underwater, you die. Training kicked in. Switched to bailout bottle. I reached for the valve on my chest and cracked open the emergency air tank strapped to my back. The hiss of air filled my helmet. I had 15 minutes of air. Maybe 20 if I slowed my breathing. I had to surface. But something was wrong with the water. The pH level must have plummeted. I grabbed the ladder on the side of the ship's hull. The steel rungs felt slimy. I looked closer. The paint on the ship was bubbling, peeling off in sheets the size of bedsheets. I began to climb. Hand over hand. 30 feet. 20 feet. The water was getting warmer. That was impossible. The harbor is always freezing. But it felt like bathwater. A chemical reaction. The ocean was heating up as it acidified. 10 feet. I looked up. The surface wasn't the usual shimmering mirror. It looked like boiling oil. It was churning, frothing, yellow and angry. I broke the surface. I wish I hadn't. The sound hit me first. It wasn't the sound of rain. It was the sound of a million frying pans. A deafening, continuous hisses. I wiped the water off my faceplate. The sky was a terrifying shade of neon chartreuse. Low, heavy clouds hung just above the cranes of the harbor, vomiting thick, viscous streaks of rain. I looked at the dock where Mikey was supposed to be. The wooden pier was gone. Or, it was mostly gone. The thick timber beams looked like black sponges. They were steaming, collapsing into the water with wet splashes. And the tender shed, the little aluminum shack where the crew hung out, it looked like a candle held under a blowtorch. The metal roof had slumped inward, dripping molten aluminum onto the deck. "Mikey!" I shouted inside my helmet, forgetting the comms were dead. I saw the diving station. The control box was a melted lump of plastic, and next to it was a shape. It was a pile of yellow slicker gear, the rain gear Mikey wore. But the gear was flat. There was no body inside, just a puddle of red and organic slurry leaking out from the bottom of the melting pants. I gagged. I threw up in my mouth, swallowing the bile. The rain had dissolved him. It had eaten right through his rain gear and erased him. To see. I heard the sound close to my ear. I looked at my shoulder. A drop of rain hit my dry suit. It didn't bead up. It stuck. It sizzled. A grey wisp of smoke rose up. It was eating the rubber. My suit. My helmet. They were heavy-duty, designed for hazmat diving, but they weren't designed for this. I was a lobster in a pot. I had to get to cover. I couldn't climb onto the wooden pier. It was dissolving. I looked toward the ship, the Iron Lady. The steel hull was holding up better than the wood, but it was streaked with rust that was forming in seconds. Rivets were popping. The gangway was lowered. It was made of aluminum grating. It looked weak, pitted, but it was still standing. I swam to the gangway. My movements were sluggish. The water surface was covered in a layer of dead fish and floating garbage that was slowly disintegrating. I hauled myself out of the water. Gravity hit me like a sledgehammer. My gear weighs about 80 pounds out of the water. Usually, Mikey helps me out. Now, I was alone. I crawled up the gangway. The metal grated under my boots. I could feel the vibration of the rain hitting the ship. Ping, ping, sizzle. I made it to the deck of the ship. It was a graveyard. Containers were stacked high. The paint was stripped off them, leaving bare, shining metal that was already turning black. I saw a crew member, or what was left of one. He must have been caught running. He was fused to the deck. His bones were visible, white porcelain shining through the red sludge of his remains. The rain hadn't dissolved the calcium yet. I needed shelter. Overhead cover. I saw a shipping container about 20 feet away. The door was slightly ajar. But 20 feet might as well have been 20 miles. Every step I took, I heard the hiss on my helmet. My faceplate, polycarbonate plastic. It was starting to blur. The acid was etching the glass. My vision was getting milky at the edges. "Move, Elias," I screamed at myself. I lumbered forward. My heavy boots clanged on the deck. A drop of rain hit my glove, burning through the outer layer. I felt the heat on my skin. I threw myself at the container gap. I squeezed inside and kicked the door shut. Darkness, but dry darkness. I collapsed on the wooden floor of the container. The sound of the rain outside changed. It was muffled now, a heavy drumming on the steel roof. Drum, drum, sizzle. I lay there, panting, listening to my own breathing in the helmet. I checked my suit. The shoulders were pitted, looking like the surface of the moon. The rubber was sticky, reverting to a tar-like state. But it hadn't breached. Not yet. I was safe. For now. I slowly unlocked my helmet. The neck dam seal popped. I lifted the heavy fiberglass helmet off my head. The smell hit me instantly. It didn't smell like rain. It smelled like sulfur, rotten eggs, and burning hair. It smelled like a chemical plant explosion. I sat up, stripping off my gloves. My hands were shaking uncontrollably. I looked around the container. It was full of crates, labeled Consumer Electronics. TVs. Flat screens. I laughed. A dry, hysterical sound. TVs, I whispered. I'm gonna die next to a bunch of TVs. Then, the sound above me changed. The drumming on the roof. It wasn't rhythmic anymore. Creak. Groan. I looked up. The roof of the shipping container. A single drop of liquid fell from the ceiling. It landed on a cardboard box of TVs in front of me. Hiss. The cardboard turned black and vanished. The acid was eating through the container roof. It was steel, cotton steel, tough stuff. But this acid, it was relentless. I checked my watch. 10:15 a.m. It had been raining for less than an hour, and it had eaten a man, a pier, and was now eating a ship. I wasn't safe here. The ship was made of metal. The container was made of metal. Eventually, the Iron Lady would dissolve, or sink. I needed concrete. Thick, reinforced concrete. I needed to get off the ship and get into the city, to the underground parking structures, or the subway. But to do that, I had to go back out into the rain. I looked at my suit. The shoulder was thin. One good downpour would burn right through to my skin. I looked around the container. I needed armor. I saw a roll of heavy-duty plastic shrink wrap, the kind used for wrapping pallets, and I saw a crate of duct tape. "Okay," I said, my voice trembling. "Okay." I started wrapping my suit, layer after layer of plastic. It wouldn't stop the acid, but it might buy me seconds, and seconds were the only currency I had left. I was just finishing taping my arm when the ship lurched. A massive groan of twisting metal echoed through the hull. The ship listed to the left. Hard. The acid must have eaten through the waterline plating. The Iron Lady was taking on water. She was going down. I grabbed my helmet. I didn't have time to tape anymore. I had to run across a melting deck, down a dissolving gangway, and find shelter in a city that was turning into slime. I clamped the helmet back on. I took a breath of the bottled air. It tasted stale. I kicked the container door open. The world outside was yellow smoke and screaming metal. The sound of a ship breaking its back is something you feel in your teeth. I stepped out of the container and the wind hit me. It wasn't a clean ocean breeze. It was a hot gust of chemical vapor. My plastic-wrapped suit crinkled loudly. I looked down the length of the deck. The Iron Lady was tilted at a 20-degree angle. The bow was dipping low, already submerged in the frothing yellow foam of the harbor. The rain hit me instantly. It sounded like sandblasting. I watched the outer layer of the shrink wrap on my forearm. A drop hit it, sizzled, and turned the clear plastic into a black, sticky spiderweb. It held. Barely. "Go!" I shouted inside the helmet. I started to run. Running in diving gear is like running in a nightmare. Your boots are lead-weighted. The suit is bulky. But the adrenaline makes you do things physics says shouldn't happen. I scrambled up the slanted deck, heading for the stern, where the gangway connected to the dock. I passed a forklift. The tires were gone, melted into black puddles. The yellow paint on the roll cage was running like wax, dripping onto the deck. I slipped. My boot hit a patch of slick red slime, the remains of the crewman I saw earlier. I went down hard on one knee. Crunch. "No!" I gasped, scrambling up. I checked the knee of my suit. The shrink wrap was torn. The rubber of the suit was exposed. I watched a single raindrop land on the black, vulcanized rubber. It smoked. A tiny gray plume. It didn't burn through. Not yet. The rubber was thick. But I had just started a timer. I looked up. The gangway was ahead. It was a nightmare. The Iron Lady had drifted away from the pier as she listed. The aluminum gangway, which used to be a bridge, was now pulled tight, screeching against the concrete of the dock. The bolts connecting it to the ship were glowing red from stress and corrosion. I was 10 feet away when the first bolt snapped. Ping! It shot past my helmet like a bullet. "Don't break, don't break," I pleaded. I reached the top of the gangway. It was steep now, a 40-degree slide down to the dock. The aluminum grating was pitted, looking like Swiss cheese. I didn't walk down. I slid. I grabbed the handrails, wrapped in my thick neoprene gloves, and vaulted. I rode the rails down like a kid on a slide, keeping my boots off the dissolving grating. I hit the concrete pier with a heavy thud, rolling to absorb the impact. I stood up and looked back. Just in time. With a shriek of tearing metal, the remaining bolts on the ship failed. The gangway detached from the Iron Lady. It swung down, crashing into the gap between the ship and the dock. It hit the water and vanished into the yellow froth with a violent hiss. The ship groaned again and drifted further out, sinking deeper. I was on land. Well, concrete. The pier was a wasteland. The wooden sections were gone, completely eaten away. The concrete pilings were standing, but the surface was pitted, rough like coral. I started moving toward the city skyline. Visibility was terrible. The rain was creating a mist, a heavy, low-hanging fog of hydrochloric vapor. It stung my eyes even through the sealed helmet. I realized the seals around my faceplate were degrading. The chemical smell was getting stronger inside the helmet. Rotten eggs. Burnt sugar. I reached the parking lot where I had parked my truck that morning. It was a graveyard of skeletons. My truck, an old Ford, was sitting in row C. The paint was gone. The metal body was rusted through in 1,000 places, looking like lace. The windshield was frosted over, etched opaque by the acid. The tires were flat, melted into the asphalt. "My truck," I whispered, a stupid, irrelevant thought. "I still owe payments on that." I kept moving. I couldn't drive. I needed a building. The harbor district is mostly industrial. Warehouses. Sheet metal roofs. I looked at the nearest warehouse. The roof was collapsing. The thin corrugated metal couldn't handle the pH. It was falling in on itself, exposing whatever was inside to the sky. I needed concrete. Thick, structural concrete. I remembered the transit center, a massive, brutalist parking garage and bus terminal about 3 blocks inland. It was a fortress of cement. I headed for the street. Walking through the city was surreal. It was quiet. The hiss of the rain drowned out everything else. There were no car alarms, no sirens, just the frying sound. I saw a bus stopped at a traffic light. The light was dead. The bus was smoking. The roof had dissolved, and the rain was pouring inside. I walked past it. I didn't want to look inside. I really didn't. But I did. The seats were plastic. They were melting. And the people. There were shapes in the seats. Synthetic clothes held up better than organic matter. I saw polyester jackets draped over nothing. Puddles of red and brown sludge on the floorboards. A pair of sneakers sat perfectly upright in the aisle. The laces were tied, but the feet were gone. I looked away, bile rising in my throat again. Don't think about it. They didn't feel it. It was fast. I tried to tell myself that. But the way the clothes were twisted. They had writhed. I focused on the transit center ahead. It loomed out of the yellow fog like a grey mountain. As I crossed the intersection, the street beneath me felt soft. Asphalt is oil-based. Tar. The acid was reacting with the tar. The road was sticky, like chewing gum on a hot sidewalk. My boots were sinking an inch with every step, making a wet suck-suck sound. I was halfway across the street when I heard the noise. It wasn't the rain. It was a howl. High-pitched. Agonized. I stopped. I scanned the fog. To my left, near the entrance of a collapsed convenience store, something was moving. It was a dog. A large stray, maybe a German Shepherd mix. It was alive. Barely. Its fur was gone in patches. Its skin was raw, blistering red. It was blind, its eyes clouded white by the fumes. It was snapping at the air, biting the rain, spinning in circles, howling in confusion and pain. It smelled me. Or maybe it just sensed movement. It stopped spinning. It turned its ravaged head toward me. "Easy, boy," I whispered, terrified. It didn't want comfort. It wanted to lash out. Pain makes things crazy. It launched itself at me. 30 minutes and 10 seconds. It moved fast, splashing through the chemical slush of the gutter. I braced myself. I was wearing 80 pounds of gear. I was a tank. But a tank with soft spots. The dog leaped. It hit my chest, teeth snapping. Its jaws clamped onto my left forearm, the one wrapped in plastic. The teeth tore through the shrink wrap. They caught on the thick neoprene. I shouted, swinging my arm. "Get off!" The dog was snarling, thrashing. Its paws scrabbled against my dry suit, claws tearing at the rubber stomach. If it breached the suit, the acid would get in. And the dog's saliva. Who knew what toxins were in that now? I grabbed the dog by the scruff of its neck with my right hand. The fur came away in my glove. Wet, slipping off the skin. I gagged but held on. I squeezed. I swung the dog away, hurling it onto the hood of a melting sedan. It yelped, scrambled for footing on the hot metal, and slid off the other side. It ran off into the fog, whimpering. I looked at my arm. The shrink wrap was shredded. The neoprene glove had deep gouges. I checked the stomach of my suit. 3 long scratches. I saw the grey mesh of the inner lining. It hadn't gone all the way through, but it was close. Too close, I breathed. My heart rate was spiking. I was using air too fast. Check the gauge. 1,500 psi. I had burned through a third of my bottle. I broke into a jog. The transit center was right there. The entrance to the parking garage was a gaping maw of concrete. I ran inside, getting under the overhang. The silence was instant. The hiss stopped. The sizzle stopped. I was under cover. I fell to my knees on the cold concrete floor, gasping. I was safe. The concrete here was thick, reinforced. It showed signs of pitting on the outside, but inside it was dry. I scanned the space. It was the ground floor. Shadows stretched long between the concrete pillars. Cars were parked in rows, untouched by the rain. They looked pristine, like time capsules from 2 hours ago. I stood up, my knees shaking. I needed to get to the upper levels? No. Think. Elias. Acid rain. Liquid flows down. The streets outside were already flooding with yellow runoff. That runoff would flow into the sewers, the subways, and the basements. The ground floor was dangerous. If the drains backed up, this place would flood with acid. I had to go up. But not too high. The roof would be dissolving. Middle floors. That was the sweet spot. I walked toward the ramp leading up. That's when I saw the people. They were huddled in the corner, near the stairwell access. A group of 5. 3 men, 2 women. They weren't wearing hazmat suits. They were wearing office clothes. They were wet. I froze. They looked up at me. They looked wrong. Their skin was red, like a severe sunburn. Their hair was matted, but it was their eyes. They stared at me, a giant rubber-clad astronaut walking out of the mist, with zero surprise, zero hope. One of the men, wearing a tattered suit jacket, stood up. He held a tire iron in his hand. His face was peeling. A flap of skin on his cheek hung loose. "Do you have water?" he croaked. His voice was a wet rattle. I took a step back. I can't open my helmet," I said, my voice booming through the external speaker on my chest. "Water," the man repeated. He took a step toward me. The others stood up too. They moved like zombies. Pain had stripped them of reason. They saw a man in a sealed suit, and they didn't see a savior. They saw a resource. "Stay back," I warned. "This suit is the only thing keeping me alive. You break it, we all die." "Take it off," one of the women hissed. She was holding a shard of glass. "Give it to us." They were delirious. The fumes. They had inhaled the acid mist. Their lungs were dissolving from the inside out. They were drowning in their own fluids, and their brains were cooking. They began to circle me. I was a commercial diver. I fought currents. I fought rust. I didn't fight people, but I was holding a heavy bronze diving helmet, and I was wearing steel-toed boots. "Don't do this," I pleaded. The man with the tire iron lunged. He swung at my faceplate. Clang. The iron hit the brass frame of the viewport. The sound rang in my skull like a bell. My vision swam. I reacted on instinct. I punched. A clumsy, underwater slow punch. But my glove was weighted with Kevlar and lead. I hit him in the chest. I heard ribs crack. He folded, coughing up pink foam. The others screamed and rushed me. Hands clawed at my suit. They were tearing at the hoses, the valves. One of them grabbed my emergency airline, the bailout bottle hose. If they ripped that, I suffocated. Get off! I shoved the woman away. I kicked out blindly. I had to get away. I couldn't fight them. There were too many, and they didn't care about pain. I turned and ran toward the ramp. "Come back!" they screamed. "Help us!" I sprinted up the concrete incline to the second floor. My boots were heavy, clomping loudly. I could hear them shuffling behind me, coughing and wheezing. I reached the second floor. More cars. Empty. I kept going. Third floor. I stopped at the landing of the third floor. I looked over the railing. They hadn't followed. They had collapsed on the ramp between the first and second levels. They didn't have the lung capacity to run. I leaned against a concrete pillar, hyperventilating. My air usage was critical. I had maybe 10 minutes left in the bottle. I needed to find a filter, or a sealed room, or a different air source. I looked at the cars parked on the third floor. Luxury sedans. SUVs. Wait. Tires. Tires are filled with air. Pressurized air. It wasn't breathing quality. It tasted like rubber and oil. But it was air. And fire extinguishers? No, CO2. That would kill me. But then I saw it. In the back of a contractor's pickup truck parked near the wall. A welding rig. Oxygen tanks. Acetylene tanks. Oxygen. I gasped. I ran to the truck. It was a green tank. Pure O2. But I couldn't just breathe pure oxygen at atmospheric pressure. It would burn my lungs, or cause seizures if the partial pressure was too high. But I could mix it. If I could rig a connection to my bailout bottle. I scrambled into the bed of the truck. I checked the valve. It was full. I was unhooking the tank when I heard the sound from the ceiling. Drip. I looked up. This was a parking garage. The floors were concrete slabs. But concrete is porous. And concrete has rebar inside, steel. On the ceiling above the truck, a wet, dark stain was spreading. The acid had eaten through the roof, the fifth floor, pooled on the fourth floor, and was now soaking through to the third. A drop of grey sludge fell from the ceiling. It landed on the hood of the truck. Hiss. The structure was failing. The acid wasn't just melting the surface. It was destroying the binder in the concrete. The garage wasn't a fortress. It was a giant, dissolving sponge. And I was in the middle of it. I grabbed the oxygen tank. It was heavy, maybe 40 pounds. I hoisted it onto my shoulder. I had to keep moving. The garage wasn't safe. But where? If the concrete was failing, if the ground was flooding. I looked out the open side of the garage structure. I looked at the city skyline. Most of the buildings were glass and steel. They were stripping down to their skeletons, the glass falling in deadly sheets. But one building stood out. The Federal Reserve Bank. Old school. Granite. Massive blocks of stone. No windows on the lower floors. It was 3 blocks away. But between me and the bank was a plaza. An open park. No cover. and the yellow fog in the plaza was swirling. Something was moving in the mist. Something big. I saw a shape. Dark, lumbering. It wasn't a dog. It was the size of a van. It pushed through a melting statue. It was a zoo animal. The city zoo was only a mile north. An elephant? A rhino? Whatever it was, its skin was sloughing off, and it was mad with rage. It smashed a car out of its way like a toy. I looked at my air gauge. 500 psi. I looked at the dissolving ceiling above me. I looked at the oxygen tank on my shoulder. I looked at the monster in the plaza. Out of the frying pan, I whispered. You learn a lot about gas physiology when you dive for a living. You learn that pure oxygen is a double-edged sword. At depth, it becomes toxic. It causes seizures, kills you instantly. But at the surface, at 1 atmosphere of pressure, it's life. It's cleaner, colder, and sharper than air. But you can't just breathe it out of the bottleneck. You need a regulator. You need a seal. I was kneeling in the bed of the contractor's pickup truck. The roof above me was weeping grey sludge. A drop hit the shoulder of my suit, burning through the last layer of plastic wrap and searing into the rubber. Ignore it. I looked at my bailout bottle, the small yellow tank strapped to my chest harness. It connected to my helmet via a standard whip hose. I looked at the green industrial oxygen tank. The valve threading was different. CGA 540 standard. Come on, I muttered, rummaging through the truck's toolbox. I found a crescent wrench. I found a brass adapter, a Christmas tree fitting used for welding torches. It wasn't perfect. It was a chaotic mismatch of threads. I shut off my bailout valve. Silence. The hiss of air into my helmet stopped. I held my breath. I had maybe 30 seconds of breathable air left inside the helmet volume before CO2 buildup started to make me dizzy. My hands were shaking in the thick gloves. I used the wrench to unscrew the whip hose from my empty bailout bottle. Hiss pop. The hose hung loose. I jammed the brass welding adapter into the oxygen tank valve. It didn't fit perfectly. I forced it, cross-threading the brass. I didn't care about ruining the threads. I just needed a seal. I cranked it down until the metal screamed. Then I shoved the open end of my helmet hose onto the welding barb. It was loose. Tape. I grabbed the roll of duct tape I had saved. I wrapped the connection tight. Layer after layer. A grey tumor of adhesive. My lungs were burning. The edges of my vision were pulsing black. The CO2 was spiking. I reached for the valve on the green tank. I cracked it open. Whoosh. The pressure hit the tape. The tape expanded, bubbled, but held. Cool. Dry gas flooded into my helmet. I gasped. It tasted metallic. It tasted like a hospital. But it was oxygen. My vision cleared instantly. The headache receded. I was breathing 100% O2. It would dry out my throat, maybe crack my lips, but it would keep me alive for hours. Then the truck shook. 46 minutes and 15 seconds. Crack boom. 10 feet away. A slab of the concrete ceiling the size of a dinner table detached. It smashed into the windshield of the truck, crushing the cab flat. Glass shards exploded outward. The shock wave knocked me backward into the bed of the truck. The acid runoff from the ceiling poured down onto the wreckage, splashing my boots. The garage was done. It was collapsing. I grabbed the neck of the green oxygen tank. It was heavy, steel, 40 pounds. I couldn't strap it to my back. I didn't have a harness for it. I had to carry it. Like a briefcase. A 40-pound briefcase that kept me alive. I hopped out of the truck bed and ran toward the exit ramp. My diving boots slapped the wet concrete. The tank banged against my leg. My suit felt lighter now that the shrink wrap was mostly melted off, but that wasn't a good thing. I was down to the base layer. I reached the ground floor exit. The yellow fog was waiting. I stepped out of the garage and into the plaza. The Civic Center Plaza was usually a nice place. Fountains, statues, benches. Now, it was a melting pot. The fountain water was boiling yellow froth. The bronze statues were green and running, their faces erased. The grass was black slime. I looked across the open space. 3 blocks away, looming grey and solid, was the Federal Reserve. Granite blocks. Small, barred windows. It looked like a tomb, but a sturdy one. Between me and the bank was 200 yards of open, dissolving pavement. And the monster. I crouched behind a concrete planter that was slowly disintegrating. I listened. The rain hissed. But under that, huff. It sounded like wet leather slapping stone, and heavy, labored breathing. The fog shifted. A gust of hot, chemical wind blew through the plaza. I saw it. It wasn't an elephant. It was a rhinoceros. A white rhino. It stood near the center of the plaza, confusingly still. Its skin, usually thick grey armor, was a patchwork of red sores and white blisters. Patches of hide were hanging off in sheets. It had lost its ears. Its horn was pitted, looking like a piece of driftwood. It was blind. The acid had taken its eyes. It stood there, swaying, swinging its massive head back and forth. It was in agony. It was terrified. And because of that, it was lethal. It was listening. I had to cross the plaza. If I went around, it would add 10 minutes to the trip. My suit wouldn't last 10 minutes in the direct rain. The rubber on my left shoulder was already tacky to the touch. "Slow and steady," I whispered. I hefted the oxygen tank. I couldn't let it clang. I stepped out from behind the planter. My boot sank into the softened asphalt. Squish. The rhino's ears, or the holes where they used to be, twitched. It snorted, a spray of bloody mucus hitting the ground. It turned its head toward me. I froze. The rain hammered on my helmet. Ping, ping, ping. Could it hear that? Could it hear the regulator hissing? It took a step toward me. Then another. It was tracking the sound. I looked around. I needed a distraction. I saw a car parked near the curb, about 50 feet to my left. It was a sedan, melting but intact. I picked up a loose piece of concrete, a chunk of curb that had broken off. I threw it. I aimed for the car's windshield. Crash. The rhino snapped. It didn't trot. It exploded into motion. 2 tons of muscle and rage launched at the sound. It hit the car like a freight train. Crunch. It flipped the sedan over. It gored the metal undercarriage, shrieking in fury, tearing the machine apart. "Go!" I yelled. I sprinted. Running with a 40-pound steel tank in one hand and 80 pounds of gear on your body is slow. I wasn't running. I was lumbering. I made it halfway across the plaza. The rain was intense here. I could feel the heat on my back. My suit was getting hot inside. The thermal reaction of the acid eating the rubber was cooking me. I was 50 yards from the bank steps. Behind me, the sound of the car being destroyed stopped. The rhino had realized the car wasn't fighting back. It snorted again. I didn't stop to look. I kept moving. Clump, clump, clump. Then I felt the vibration. The ground shook. Boom, boom, boom. It was charging. I looked over my shoulder. The rhino was emerging from the fog, head down, galloping straight for me. It was moving terrifyingly fast for something that big. I couldn't outrun it. I looked ahead. The bank entrance. It wasn't a door. It was a revolving door, flanked by heavy bronze gates. The gates were closed. The revolving door glass was etched opaque, likely jammed. I was going to be pinned against the wall and crushed. Think Elias. I looked at the rhino. It was blind. It was following the sound of my boots. I stopped running. I stood my ground, 20 feet from the granite wall of the bank. I unhooked the heavy maglite from my belt. I waited. The rhino closed the distance. 40 yards. 30. I could smell it now, burning hair and rot. When it was 20 yards away, I threw the maglite. I didn't throw it at the rhino. I threw it hard, overhand, at the bronze gates of the bank entrance behind me. Clang rattle. The heavy flashlight hit the metal gates with a sharp, ringing sound. The rhino swerved. It adjusted its trajectory at the last second, aiming for the impact noise. It bypassed me by 5 feet. The wind of its passing nearly knocked me over. It hit the bank entrance full tilt. Krakom. The impact was cataclysmic. The rhino smashed into the bronze gates and the granite archway. Metal screamed and sheared. Stone pulverized. The animal collapsed in the wreckage, stunned, buried under rubble. But the gates were breached. A hole, jagged and dark, had opened up into the lobby. I didn't wait to see if the rhino got up. I scrambled over the debris, stepping on broken granite and twisted bronze. I squeezed through the gap. I tumbled onto a marble floor. I scrambled away from the door, dragging my tank, expecting the beast to follow. But nothing came through. Outside, I heard a low, pathetic wheezing. The rhino was down. It had broken itself against the fortress. I lay on the floor, staring up at the ceiling. It was high, coffered, gold leaf and plaster, and dry, perfectly, beautifully dry. The silence inside the Federal Reserve was heavy. It felt like a church. I sat up, checking my gear. My suit was a disaster. The outer layer was gone. The inner weave was exposed on my shoulders and thighs. The rubber was sticky, like tar. If I had stayed outside for 5 more minutes, I would have been breached. I checked the oxygen tank. Still flowing. I took a deep breath of the metallic gas. I stood up and looked around. The lobby was massive. Pillars the size of redwoods. Teller's cages made of thick brass and bulletproof glass. It was empty. No guards. No customers. Just the silence of money. I walked toward the center of the room. My boots squeaked on the polished marble. "Hello," I called out. My voice boomed in the cavernous space. No answer. But then I saw it. Near the back of the lobby, by the entrance to the vaults. A light. Not an emergency light. A lantern. A camping lantern, sitting on a desk. And next to the lantern, a gun. A shotgun. Pump action. I froze. "Don't move," a voice echoed from the shadows of the vault corridor. It was a woman's voice. Sharp. Professional. I raised my hands, one gloved, one holding the hose to my helmet. "I'm not armed," I shouted through my speaker. "I'm a diver. I just want shelter." A figure stepped into the light of the lantern. She was wearing a security uniform, grey blazer, black tactical pants. But she was also wearing a gas mask, a high-end military-grade mask. She held the shotgun steady. "You brought the rain in with you," she said, pointing at the puddle of sludge forming around my boots. "You're dripping acid on my floor." "I'll clean it up," I said, a hysterical laugh bubbling in my chest. "Just don't shoot. My suit is compromised. One pellet and I'm dead." She studied me. The black lenses of her gas mask reflected the lantern light. She lowered the gun slightly. "You're the diver? From the harbor?" I blinked. "How did you know?" "We've been watching the cameras," she said. "Or we were, until the lines melted." She motioned with the barrel of the gun. "Come on. The lobby isn't safe. The roof is granite, but the skylights are glass. They'll give way in an hour." "Where are we going?" I asked, hefting my oxygen tank. She turned toward the massive, circular steel door of the main vault. "Down," she said. "The vault is airtight. It's the only place in the city that won't liquefy." She walked to the vault door. It was open. Inside, I saw movement. Shadows. There were others. I walked toward the vault. As I crossed the threshold, I looked back at the front entrance. Through the hole the rhino had made, I saw the yellow fog swirling, and in the distance, through the rain, I saw something else. A flash of lightning. But it wasn't white. It was red. Crimson lightning, arcing through the green clouds. And when the thunder hit, it didn't sound like a crack. It sounded like a voice. A deep, subsonic thrum that vibrated the marble floor beneath my feet. The security guard looked back too. Her grip on the shotgun tightened. "Get inside," she whispered. "The storm is changing." The sound of the vault door closing was the most beautiful thing I had ever heard. It was a circular plug of steel, 3 feet thick. The guard, whose name tag read Vera, spun the chrome wheel. The locking bolts, cylinders the size of my forearm, slid into the frame with a satisfying thunk, thunk, thunk. The screaming wind stopped. The hissing rain stopped. The roar of the dying rhino stopped. There was just the sound of my regulator. Hiss, click, hiss. "You can take it off," Vera said. Her voice was muffled behind her gas mask. She lowered the shotgun but didn't safety it. "The air scrubbers are running on the emergency generator. It's breathable in here." I looked around before I unsealed. We were in the main holding area. It looked like a library, but instead of books, the shelves were stacked with pallets of shrink-wrapped cash. In the center of the room, sitting on stacks of $100 bills like they were lawn furniture, were about a dozen people. They looked bad. Some were coughing into rags stained with pink froth. Others were staring at the wall, catatonic. They wore the shredded remains of business suits and security uniforms. I reached up and uncranked the makeshift valve on my oxygen tank. I pulled the tape off the hose connection. Rip. I unlatched the helmet neck dam. Pop. I pulled the heavy bronze helmet off my head. The air hit my face. It was cool, dry, and smelled intensely of ozone, gun oil, and old paper. I took a breath. My own lungs. No rubber taste. "Oh God," I whispered, rubbing my face. My skin felt raw, sensitive. I looked down at my suit. It was a ruin. The rubber was tacky, melting in slow motion. I peeled the top half down, tying the sleeves around my waist. My shirt underneath was soaked in sweat. "Check your skin," Vera ordered. She had pulled off her gas mask. She was older than I thought, 50s maybe, with grey hair cut short and eyes that had seen too much. "If you have any burns, we have baking soda in the break room supplies. Neutralize it now." I checked my arm, where the dog had bitten me. The skin was bruised, purple and yellow, but the teeth hadn't broken the final layer of the suit. I was intact. "I'm clean," I said. A man in a torn suit stood up from a pallet of 20s. He looked important, or he used to be. Gold watch, cufflinks. "You came from outside," he said, his voice trembling. Is the army coming? Did you see tanks?" "I saw a rhino," I said flatly. "And I saw the city melting. There's no army. There's just rain." The man slumped back down, putting his head in his hands. "My portfolio," he muttered. "The market." "Forget the market, Mr. Henderson," Vera snapped. She looked at me. "I'm Vera, head of shift security. This is what's left of the staff and a few clients who were in the lobby when the siren went off." "Elias," I said. "Diver." "Diver," she nodded at my heavy boots. "Useful skill. Usually. Not sure how much diving you'll do inside a vault." "I have tools," I said, patting the pouch on my hip. "And I have oxygen." I pointed to the green tank. "We have air," Vera said. "For now. This vault has an independent life support system. Scrubbers. CO2 removal. It's designed to keep 6 people alive for 30 days during a nuclear event." I counted the heads in the room. "There are 14 people here," I said. Vera didn't blink. "I know the math, Elias. We have 12 days. Maybe 10 if people keep hyperventilating." I walked over to the wall of the vault. It was lined with safety deposit boxes. Thousands of them. "So we just wait?" I asked. 10 days? The rain isn't stopping. The pH is dropping. Eventually, it'll eat through the street, through the foundation. "This is level 1, Vera interrupted. "The walls are 4 feet of reinforced concrete and steel liner. The roof is granite. We are 40 feet underground. It'll take weeks for the acid to get here." She sounded confident, but I saw her hand. It was shaking slightly on the grip of the shotgun. "What was that light?" I asked. "Outside. The red lightning." The room went quiet. Even Mr. Henderson looked up. "We felt it," a young woman whispered from the corner. She was wearing a teller's uniform. "Before you came in. Every time it flashed, the lights in here buzzed. Like it was angry." "It's an atmospheric shift," I said, trying to sound like I knew what I was talking about. "Chemical ionization. The acid is conductive." "It sounded like a voice," the woman insisted. "It sounded like it was looking for us." Boom. The vault shook. Dust rained down from the ceiling lights. It wasn't a physical blow. It was thunder, but deep. Subsonic. It vibrated in my chest cavity. "That's close," Vera said. I looked at the heavy steel door. "Is there a back way out?" I asked. "If the front is buried?" "There's an emergency escape tunnel," Vera said. "Leads to the sewer main. But the sewers are—" She trailed off. "Flooded," I finished. "With runoff. If the streets are melting," she said, "the sewers are full of sludge. We can't go down. We can't go up. We're trapped," Henderson moaned. "We're secure," Vera corrected. But she didn't sound convinced. I sat down on a stack of cash. It was uncomfortable. I needed to rest. My body was crashing. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving behind a deep, aching exhaustion. I closed my eyes. Drip. My eyes snapped open. I looked at the ceiling. Dry. I looked at the door. Dry. Gurgle. Splash. It was coming from the floor. I stood up. Vera. The drainage system. Where does it go? What? She looked at me, confused. There are floor drains in the corners. In case of pipe bursts. They lead to a sump pump system in the sub-basement. Level 2. The sub-basement, I repeated. Below us. Yes. It's storage for archives. And the mechanical room. I walked to the corner of the vault. There was a small brass grate in the floor. I shined my maglite into it. It wasn't dark. It was glowing. Faintly. A dull, pulsating crimson light was reflecting up from the drain pipe. And the sound. Hiss. Pop. Gurgle. The pump failed, I whispered. Or the sewer backed up. The sub-basement is flooding. Flooding with what? Vera asked, joining me. I watched as a bubble of thick, pink froth rose up through the grate. It popped, releasing a tiny wisp of steam. Acid, I said, mixed with whatever else is down there. As we watched, the red light in the drain got brighter. It pulsed. Thrum. Thrum. It matched the rhythm of the thunder outside. The building is conductive, I realized, the horror hitting me. Vera, the acid rain. It's an electrolyte. The whole city is a battery. And that red lightning, it's charging the ground. What does that mean? Henderson shouted, scrambling over. It means, I backed away from the drain, that the water rising from the basement isn't just corrosive. It's electrified. ZZZT. A spark arched from the brass drain grate to the nearest metal shelf. The shelf was stacked with gold bars. Gold is a perfect conductor. The spark jumped from the shelf to the next one. Snap. Crackle. Back. I yelled. Get away from the walls. Get away from the shelves. The survivors scrambled toward the center of the room, climbing onto the pallets of cash. Paper. Paper is an insulator. The cash. I shouted. Stay on the cash. Red liquid began to ooze out of the floor drain. It wasn't water. It was a thick, gelatinous sludge. It glowed with that malevolent red energy. It spread across the marble floor like lava. When it touched a metal table leg, the metal glowed cherry red and melted instantly. The sump pumps, Vera said, her face pale. They're running in reverse. The pressure from the sewers is pushing it back up. We have to seal the drains, I said. How? Vera yelled over the buzzing sound of the electricity. You touch that, you fry. I looked at my gear. My rubber suit. Rubber is an insulator. My boots. Rubber. My gloves. Neoprene. But the sludge was acid. It would eat the rubber. I had seconds. Maybe a minute before the rubber dissolved. I need a plug, I shouted. Something to jam in the hole. I looked around. Gold bars. No, conductive. Cash. It would dissolve into mush. Then I saw it. In the corner, near the safety deposit boxes. A bag of coin blanks. Or something similar. No, it was a silicone sealant gun. A maintenance kit left by a worker. And a bucket of... What was that? Vera. What's in that bucket? Fire suppression clay. she yelled. 4 ceiling cable penetrations. Clay. I grabbed the bucket. It was heavy. Putty. It's ceramic-based? Yes. Ceramics don't conduct. And they resist acid. I grabbed the bucket. I'm going in. Elias, don't. Vera shouted. I pulled my diving hood back up. I didn't have time to seal the helmet. I just needed the rubber on my hands and feet. I stepped off the pallet of cash. My boot hit the red sludge. Zap. I felt a tingle shoot up my leg, even through the thick rubber sole. It was like stepping on a live wire. The acid immediately started attacking the rubber. Smoke rose from my ankles. Fast. I gritted my teeth. Move fast. I waded through the glowing slime. It was ankle deep. I reached the drain. The red light was blinding now. The sludge was geysering up. I plunged my gloved hands into the bucket of fire clay. I grabbed a massive handful of the grey putty. I jammed it onto the drain grate. Zzzt. A spark jumped to my glove. I screamed. It felt like a hammer hit my elbow. I pushed harder. The clay sizzled, but it held. It blocked the flow. I grabbed more clay. I packed it down, creating a mound over the drain. The flow stopped. The red light dimmed, buried under the grey muck. I turned to the other drain across the room. One more. I ran. My boots were smoking. The soles were getting soft, sticky. I was losing insulation. I reached the second drain. The sludge here was deeper. I threw the rest of the bucket's contents onto the grate. I stomped on it with my boot. Crack. My boot heel split. The acid touched my sock. Ah! I fell back, rolling onto a pallet of bills. I scrambled up to the top of the stack, clutching my foot. It burned. Like fire. Like a hot iron. But the flow had stopped. The floor was covered in a thin layer of red slime, but it wasn't rising. The room was silent again, except for the heavy breathing of the survivors and the sizzling of my boot. Vera climbed over the stacks of money to get to me. "Let me see," she said. She cut my boot off with a knife. My heel was red, blistered, the skin peeling. But the bone wasn't exposed. Second-degree chemical burn, she assessed. And electrical shock. She bandaged it quickly. "You stopped it," Henderson said, staring at the floor. "You stopped the water. For now," I panted, fighting the pain. "That clay won't hold forever. And if the pressure builds up—" "If the pressure builds up," Vera said grimly, "the pipes will burst inside the walls." She stood up and looked at the massive steel door of the vault. "We have a problem, Elias." "Which one?" I asked, wiping sweat from my eyes. "The sludge," she pointed to the floor. "It's acidic, right?" "Yes." "And it's conductive." "Yes." "Look at the door seal." I looked. The red sludge had pooled against the bottom of the massive round vault door. It was bubbling against the steel, and right where the door met the frame, blue sparks were dancing. "The electronics," Vera whispered. "The locking mechanism is electronic. The keypad. The release motors. Click. Whir. Clunk." The sound came from inside the door. Gears were grinding. "What is that?" Henderson asked. "The failsafe," Vera said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "If the system detects a short circuit or a tamper attempt." Clunk. Thud. A heavy steel deadbolt slammed into place inside the frame. A mechanical lockdown. It just engaged the time lock. Vera said. And the anti-drill bolts. She looked at me, her eyes wide. We didn't just lock ourselves in, Elias. The door just welded itself shut. Even if we had the code, it won't open. For how long? I asked. Vera looked at the digital timer on the inside of the door. The red numbers were flickering, dying as the acid ate the circuits. Forever, she said. Silence returned to the vault. A heavier, darker silence. We were entombed, buried in a box of gold and rotting paper, 40 feet underground, with a layer of electrified acid on the floor and a door that would never open again. Henderson started to sob. A high, thin sound. I looked at the floor drains I had plugged. I looked at the red sludge. I looked at the green oxygen tank sitting on the pallet next to me. We can't go out the door, I said quietly. We can't go anywhere, Vera said, sitting down heavily. No, I said. I sat up, wincing at the pain in my foot. We can't go out. I pointed at the floor drain, the one pulsing with red light beneath the clay. The only way out is down. Down. Vera looked at me like I was insane. Into the sludge. Into the flooded basement. You said there was an emergency escape tunnel in the sub-basement, I said. That leads to the sewers, which are flooded, which are wet, I corrected. I'm a diver, Vera. I work in the wet. You have one tank, she argued, and there are 14 of us, and we don't have suits. I know, I said. I looked at the pallets of cash. But we have insulation. I grabbed a bundle of $100 bills. I wrapped it around my arm. I taped it with the duct tape. It was thick, dense. Paper is an insulator, and if we wrap it tight enough in plastic, it might act as a temporary dry suit. You want us to make diving suits out of money? Henderson asked, staring at me. I want you to live, I said. The door is dead. The air will run out in 10 days. But the acid will eat those seals in two. We are going to breach the floor drain. We are going to swim through the electrified sludge. And we are going to find that tunnel. I looked at the green oxygen tank. And I'm going to turn this welding tank into a filling station. We're going to share the air. I looked at Vera. Do you have any plastic wrap? Garbage bags? Evidence bags? Vera stared at me for a long second. Then, a small, grim smile appeared. We have the currency wrap, she said. Pallets of it in the corner. Get it, I said. We're going to build a submarine crew. I looked down at the red glow beneath the clay. The beast outside couldn't get in, so we were going to go into the belly of the beast. Hold still, I grunted, wrapping a layer of plastic sheeting around Henderson's calf. He was shaking so bad I could barely get the tape to stick. His legs were encased in bricks of $100 bills. We had raided the pallets. We took the straps off and arranged the stacks of cash like armor plates. Shins, thighs, forearms, chest. It feels heavy, Henderson whimpered. He looked like a ragged, green Michelin man. It's supposed to be heavy, I said, cinching the duct tape tight. That's 3 inches of dense paper. It'll insulate you from the shock, and the acid has to eat through 40 grand before it touches your skin. You're wearing a house, Henderson. Try not to ruin the investment. I looked around the vault. It was a factory of desperation. Vera had organized the line. The 14 survivors were armoring up. The air smelled of adhesive and panic. They were stripping the plastic wrap off the cash pallets to use as waterproofing. They were using rubber bands from the money bundles to secure the cuffs. Helmets, Vera called out. She was finishing her own suit. She had opted for stacks of 50s, thinner bricks, more mobility. "We don't have helmets," Attila said, her voice trembling. "We have evidence bags," Vera said, holding up a box of thick, clear plastic bags used for transporting cash. "Put it over your head. Tape the neck loose enough to get a hand under, but tight enough to keep splashes out." It was a nightmare vision. People wrapped in garbage and money, with plastic bags over their heads. I checked my own gear. My diving suit was compromised, so I reinforced it. I taped stacks of bills over my burns. I rewrapped my boots until they looked like elephant feet. I checked the green oxygen tank. 1,800 psi. It was enough. If we didn't panic. "Listen to me," I shouted, my voice booming in the enclosed space. Everyone stopped rustling. "We are going down into the sub-basement. It is flooded. The water is electrified. If you fall, you die. If you tear your suit, you die." I held up the regulator hose connected to the green tank. "The air down there is toxic. Chlorine gas. Acid vapor. You cannot breathe it. We will move in a chain. I am the lead." I take a breath. I pass the hose to Vera. She passes it back. We move to the next person. One breath. Hold it. Move. "We can't breathe underwater with that," Henderson pointed out. "The basement isn't fully submerged," I lied. I hoped it wasn't. "It's chest deep." We wade. "We don't swim unless we have to." I looked at the floor drain I had plugged with clay. "We can't fit through the drain," I said. "We have to pull the access panel." I pointed to a square seam in the marble floor near the wall. "A maintenance hatch for the heavy cabling." "Pry bars," I ordered. 3 of the strongest survivors grabbed the steel bars from the security kit. We jammed them into the seam. On 3. 1, 2, 3. Crack. The marble splintered. The heavy steel plate beneath it groaned. We heaved. The plate lifted. The sound hit us first. Hissed HRUM. It sounded like a waterfall landing on a power line. Then the light. A crimson, hellish glow flooded up from the hole, painting the gold walls of the vault in blood-red light. I looked down. It was a drop of about 8 feet into the sub-basement. The water below was churning. It was a thick, pink slush, and skating across the surface were arcs of red electricity, jumping from pipe to pipe like angry snakes. "The ladder is gone," I said, shining my light down. The metal rungs had dissolved. "We jump?" Vera asked. She looked terrified, but her jaw was set. "No," I said. "We lower. If you jump, you splash. You splash acid on your face. Game over." We used a fire hose from the emergency cabinet. I tied it off to the vault door hinge. I threw the end into the hole. "I go first," I said. "I secure the landing zone. Then I call for you." I grabbed the oxygen tank. I grabbed the hose. I sat on the edge of the hole. My legs, wrapped in thousands of dollars, dangled into the red abyss. The heat coming up was intense. It felt like an oven. "See you on the other side," I whispered. I slid down the hose. My boots hit the liquid. Splush! I braced myself for the shock. I felt a vibration, a deep, numbing hum that went through the soles of my boots, through the money, and into my bones. But it didn't burn. The insulation held. I stood up. The liquid was waist deep. It was thick, heavy, dragging at my legs. I looked around. Level 2 was a labyrinth of metal shelves and piping. The shelves held cardboard archive boxes that were dissolving into grey mush, adding to the sludge. The ceiling above me, the floor of the vault, was dripping. But the danger was the walls. The electrical panels on the far wall were submerged. They were arcing violently. Zzzt boom. Every time they arced, the red light flared, blinding me. The air was yellow. Visible gas. I put the regulator in my mouth. I took a breath of pure oxygen. It tasted sweet compared to the rot outside. Come down. I waved the light. Vera came next. She slid down the hose, landing with a stifled gasp as the cold, thick fluid hit her legs. She looked at me through the plastic bag over her head. Her eyes were wide, frantic. I handed her the regulator. She took a breath. Deep. Desperate. She handed it back. One by one, they descended. The banker. The teller. The janitor. 14 people. Wrapped in cash. Standing in a line in a flooded basement that looked like the inside of an artery. Hold hands. I signaled. Daisy chain. We formed a human centipede. I was at the front, holding the tank. Move, I mumbled around the mouthpiece. We began to wade. Walking in chest-deep acid is slow. The fluid resistance was high, and every step was a gamble. The floor was slippery with dissolved paper and slime. If anyone slipped, splash. Behind me, someone stumbled. A scream, muffled by plastic. I whipped around. It was the young teller. She had tripped on a submerged pipe. She fell forward. Her hands splashed into the liquid. The plastic bag on her head. A drop of red sludge hit the plastic, right over her eye. Hiss. The plastic clouded instantly. She scrambled up, pouring at her face. "Don't touch it!" Vera screamed, her voice muffled. I passed the regulator back. "Breathe. Keep moving." We couldn't stop to treat her. We had to keep moving. The air in the room was eating the plastic bags. We had minutes before the suits failed. We reached the far wall. The tunnel. I pointed. There was a heavy blast door with a wheel mechanism. It was labeled Emergency Sewer Access. Authorized personnel only. It was half submerged. The bottom half of the door was underwater. I waded over to it. I grabbed the wheel. My gloves were wrapped in money, but the money was getting soggy. The acid was soaking through the paper layers. The outer bills were turning into white mush, sloughing off like dead skin. I pulled on the wheel. It wouldn't budge. Rusted or fused. "Help me!" I yelled, spitting out the regulator. Vera and Henderson waded forward. We grabbed the wheel together. 6 hands wrapped in wet money. Heave! We pulled. Creak. The metal groaned. A rust seal broke. Again. Creak. It turned. Once. Twice. The door seal popped. Whoosh. Air rushed into the room. The sewer tunnel had negative pressure. Or maybe just a draft. I pushed the heavy steel door open. Darkness. But not red darkness. Just black. And the sound of rushing water. Inside. I ushered them through. We scrambled over the lip of the door frame, falling into the tunnel. The floor here was wet, but not flooded. It was a round concrete pipe, about 8 feet in diameter. A catwalk ran along the side. Below the catwalk, in the center channel, a river of black, foul water was rushing by. It wasn't glowing red. It was sewage mixed with acid runoff. We collapsed on the metal grating of the catwalk. The air here smelled horrible, methane and waste, but it wasn't the stinging yellow chlorine of the basement. "Masks off," I ordered. "Save the bags." They ripped the plastic bags off their heads, gasping for air. The teller was crying, clutching her face. The drop of acid had burned her cheek, but missed her eye. Vera was already applying the baking soda paste from her pocket. I checked the tank. 1,200 psi. We had used a lot. Hyperventilating burns air fast. "Where does this go?" Henderson asked, peeling a layer of dissolved $100 bills off his arm. The armor was ruined. It lay in wet clumps on the grating. "Ideally," I said, "it leads to the main storm drain junction, which empties into the bay." "The bay is acid," Vera reminded me. "Yes, but the junction also connects to the subway lines," I said. "If we can get to the subway tunnels, we can get inland, under the mountains, away from the coast." "We have to walk?" Henderson asked, looking at his blistered feet. "We have to move," I said. "Look at the water." I pointed to the black river below the catwalk. It was rising, fast, and floating in it. Rats. Dead rats. Thousands of them. Their bodies bleached white. And then something else. Something moving against the current. I shined my light down the tunnel. The beam cut through the gloom. About 50 yards down, the water broke. A pale, slick head emerged. It was sleek, like an otter, but hairless. Then another. Then another. They were crawling up the sides of the sewer pipe. They had claws, long, hooked claws designed for gripping concrete. They were about the size of large dogs. Mutated? No. Too fast. These were something deep. Something that lived in the dark pipes. And the acid had flushed them out. "Sewer gators?" Henderson whispered, horrified. "Not gators," I said, backing up. "Newts. Or salamanders. Giant ones." They hissed. A wet, clicking sound. They smelled the fresh meat. They smelled the burns. "Run," I said. We scrambled down the catwalk. The creatures were fast. They moved with a fluid, undulating motion. They splashed out of the water and onto the metal grating, their claws clicking on the steel. "Don't look back," Vera shouted, shoving the group forward. I brought up the rear. I still had the oxygen tank. It was a heavy club if I needed it. I swung the light back. The lead creature was 10 feet away. It opened its mouth. It didn't have teeth. It had rows of serrated ridges. And it spit. A glob of mucus hit the wall next to my head. Hiss. It was acidic. Biological acid. To match the rain. They spit. I yelled. "Cover your skin." We sprinted. The tunnel curved ahead. We rounded the bend and hit a dead end. Not a wall. A collapse. The ceiling of the sewer tunnel had caved in. Rebar and concrete blocked the path. The catwalk was severed. Blocked. Henderson screamed. I looked at the blockage. There was a gap near the top, close to the ceiling. "Climb," I yelled. "Up the debris." Vera started boosting people up. I turned to face the creatures. There were 3 of them on the catwalk now. They slowed down, sensing we were trapped. They spread out, stalking. I needed a weapon. I looked at the green oxygen tank. I looked at the wrench in my belt. "Vera," I said, not turning around, "get them through the hole." "What are you doing?" I'm going to give them some indigestion. I unstrapped the regulator hose. I held the tank in one hand and the wrench in the other. I waited. The lead salamander lunged. It was fast, a blur of pale flesh. I didn't swing the tank. I cracked the valve. Fully open. Whoosh! A jet of pure, high-pressure oxygen blasted out of the tank neck. It hit the creature in the face. Oxygen isn't flammable by itself, but it makes things burn very, very fast. And it's cold. The expansion of gas freezes the air. The creature recoiled, shrieking as the freezing gas hit its sensitive gills. It stumbled back, knocking the second one into the water. Elias! Now! Vera screamed from the top of the debris pile. I turned and scrambled up the concrete rubble. The third creature snapped at my boot, my money-wrapped boot. It got a mouthful of Benjamin Franklin's. It shook its head, confused by the texture. I vaulted through the gap. We fell out onto the other side of the collapse. We were in a larger space now. A junction. Huge. Vaulted ceilings. Old brickwork. This was the old city infrastructure. The intersection of the storm drains and the forgotten subway lines. It was relatively dry here, but it was loud. The sound of rushing water was everywhere. Waterfalls of runoff were pouring in from pipes high above. Which way? Henderson gasped. I shone my light around. To the left, a dark tunnel marked storm drain, harbor output. To the right, a tiled archway marked Metro North. Metro, I said. We go inland. We started walking toward the subway tunnel. But as we crossed the junction floor, the ground trembled. Not a vibration. A heartbeat. I stopped. I looked at the center of the junction chamber. There was a massive pool of water there. A settling pond. The water was black, oily. Bubbles were rising to the surface. Massive bubbles. And then, the water began to drain. Rapidly. A whirlpool formed in the center of the pool. A vortex. It's flushing, I realized. The tide is going out. Or the system is emptying. And then, from the center of the whirlpool, something rose up. It wasn't a salamander. It was metal. A structure. A rusted iron cage. An elevator? A diving bell? It broke the surface with a screech of tearing metal. And inside the cage, a light was blinking. Blue. Beep. 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 Is that? Vera squinted. I stepped closer. It was a submersible. A small, autonomous drone. Painted on the side, barely visible through the rust and grime. US Navy salvage. It had been sucked into the storm drain from the harbor. And it was transmitting. It's a signal, I whispered. Someone is looking for survivors. I ran toward the edge of the pool. Hello, I shouted, waving my light. We're here. The drone rotated. Its camera lens focused on me. A speaker crackled to life. A voice. Distorted, synthesized, but intelligible. Biological assets detected. Location confirmed. Sector 4. Assets? Vera asked, stepping up beside me. That doesn't sound like rescue. The drone clicked. A panel on its side slid open. Containment protocol initiated. A canister launched from the drone. It arched through the air and landed at our feet. It rolled to a stop. It was silver, sleek, and it was hissing. Green gas began to vent from the canister. Gas! I screamed. Run! Chlorine gas is heavy. It hugs the ground. It flows like water, filling the low spots first. It turns the moisture in your lungs into hydrochloric acid. You don't just suffocate. You drown in your own dissolved tissue. I watched the silver canister spinning on the floor of the junction chamber. The green fog was expanding violently, rolling over the black pool where the drone floated. Metro tunnel! I screamed. Go! Go! I grabbed Henderson by his money-wrapped collar and shoved him toward the tiled archway. Vera was already herding the others. The gas was nipping at our heels. I could smell it, bleach and copper. We scrambled into the dark throat of the subway tunnel. "Don't stop!" I yelled. "We need elevation. The gas will settle in the lows." We ran along the tracks. The subway tunnel was old, smelling of grease and rats. The emergency lights were dead. My mag light cut a cone through the dust. Behind us, the green fog rolled into the tunnel entrance. It was slower than us, but it was relentless. A creeping wall of death. We ran for what felt like miles. My boots, my ruined, melted diving boots, slapped against the railroad ties. My foot was screaming in agony, the burns rubbing against the raw leather. But I couldn't stop. We passed a derelict train car. Inside, I saw shapes. Commuters who had died in the first hour. They weren't dissolved. They were pristine. Too pristine. Their skin was grey, hard, preserved. The gas. The military had been flooding these tunnels for hours. We were just the last ones to the party. "Keep moving," Vera urged, pushing the weeping teller forward. "Don't look at them." The tracks began to slope upward. "Up," I gasped, checking the gradient. "We're heading inland, toward the hills." "How far?" Henderson wheezed. His armor of $100 bills was shedding, leaving a trail of wet paper behind him. "Until we hit the wall," I said. "There's always a wall." We found the wall a mile later. It wasn't a figure of speech. The subway tunnel didn't just end. It was blocked. A massive, hastily erected barrier of concrete and steel plates sealed the tunnel completely. It looked like a dam. Stenciled on the metal in bright orange paint, "Quarantine perimeter, lethal force authorized," and in the center of the barrier, a heavy blast door. Sealed. We collapsed against the barrier. The survivors slid down the cold concrete, gasping. I shone my light back down the tunnel. The green fog was still coming. I could see the haze reflecting the light about 200 yards back. "Open it." Henderson banged his fists on the steel door. "Let us in. We're Americans. Open the damn door." Clang, clang. No answer. Just the silence of the tunnel and the distant hiss of the gas. I walked up to the door. I put my ear against the steel. I heard machinery, fans, voices. There were people on the other side. Clean people. Safe people. I unhooked my heavy wrench. I hammered on the door. 3 sharp raps. "We have civilians," I shouted. "We have non-infected personnel. Open the seal." A speaker box mounted above the door crackled. A voice. Not a robot this time. A human. Tired. Scared. Negative. Sector 4 is compromised. Containment is in effect. Step away from the blast door. "We are not compromised," Vera shouted, stepping up to the mic. "I am Federal Reserve Security. I have authorization codes." "Your codes are expired, ma'am," the voice said coldly. "The reserve is gone. The city is gone. There is no coming back from that zone. The gas is coming, I yelled. You're killing us. We're saving the rest of the country, the voice replied. I'm sorry. Make your peace. The speaker clicked off. Henderson screamed. He threw himself at the door, clawing at the steel until his fingernails broke. The teller curled into a ball, sobbing. I looked at the green fog. It was closer, 100 yards. I looked at the blast door. Too thick to cut, too heavy to blast. I looked at my gear. The green oxygen tank, 300 psi, almost empty. My suit, shredded. My boots, ruined. I looked at the infrastructure. This was a subway tunnel. Subways have drainage. They have pump rooms to keep the tracks dry. If there was a barrier here, the water had to go somewhere. Vera, I said. The drainage grates. Along the tracks. We ran to the side of the tunnel. There was a grate. A storm drain. I shined the light down. Black water. Moving fast. Flowing under the barrier. It flows out, Vera said. Back to the city. Back to the acid. Usually, I said. But look at the flow. I dropped a piece of paper money into the water. It floated. Toward the barrier. Suction, I whispered. They're pumping water in. From the reservoir. To flush the tunnels. So, the pipe goes under the wall, I said. And it connects to the reservoir on the other side. The clean side. I pulled up the grate. The pipe was narrow. Maybe 3 feet wide. Concrete. Filled with rushing water. It's a siphon, I said. If we go in, the suction will pull us through. But it's flooded. Completely. We'll drown, Henderson said. It's 100 feet, I estimated, looking at the thickness of the barrier. Maybe more. You have to hold your breath. We can't, the teller whispered. We're exhausted. I looked at the oxygen tank. I have 1 breath for everyone, I said. 1 hit of pure O2. It saturates your blood. Gives you an extra minute of bottom time. I looked at the green fog. 50 yards. The acid rain was starting to drip through the tunnel ceiling here too. The barrier wasn't just blocking us. It was blocking the collapse. The roof above us was groaning. We go now, I said. Or we choke. I lined them up. Take a breath. Deep. Hold it. Jump. First the janitor. He took a hit from the tank. His eyes widened as the oxygen hit his brain. He jumped into the black water. Splush. He was gone, sucked into the pipe. Then the teller. Then Henderson. He looked at me one last time. He stripped off the remaining money armor. He dropped a stack of hundreds into the mud. Worthless, he muttered. He took the breath and jumped. Vera was last. She looked at me. You're out of air, aren't you? I looked at the gauge. 50 psi. Enough for you, I said. What about you? I'm a diver, I smiled, though my face cracked with the effort. I can hold it longer than anyone. She grabbed my hand. See you on the other side, Elias. She breathed the last of the gas. The tank hissed and went silent. She jumped. I was alone. The green gas curled around my ankles. It burned. The ceiling above me cracked. A chunk of concrete fell, smashing the tracks where we had just been standing. I dropped the empty green tank. It clanged against the rail, a hollow, mournful sound. I didn't take a breath of air. The air was poison now. I hyperventilated gently, purging the CO2 from my blood, just like I did on the rig. I looked back at the darkness of the tunnel, at the ruins of my city. Goodbye, I thought. I jumped into the pipe. Darkness. Cold. Speed. The suction grabbed me like a giant hand. It pulled me down into the concrete throat. I was spinning, tumbling. I couldn't see anything. I kept my arms tight to my sides to avoid snagging. My shoulder scraped against the rough concrete. I felt the suit tear. I felt the cold water hit my skin. But it wasn't acid. It was fresh water. Cold, mountain runoff. My lungs burned. Not from the gas, but from the need to breathe. I counted the seconds in my head. 1 Mississippi. 10. 30. The pipe narrowed. I felt a grate ahead. Panic flared. If there's a grate, I'm dead. I reached out. My hand hit metal bars. Blocked. We were blocked. I kicked hard, fighting the current. I felt bodies pressed against the grate. Henderson. Vera. They were stuck. The suction was pinning them against the intake screen. They were drowning. I didn't have air, but I had tools. I reached for the heavy wrench still on my belt. I found the locking bolt of the grate in the dark. I couldn't see it. I had to feel it. My lungs screamed. My vision sparked with phantom lights. Turn. Turn. The bolt was seized. I braced my feet against the concrete walls. I pulled with everything I had left. Every muscle fiber tore. Screech. The bolt sheared. I kicked the grate. It swung open. The bodies flushed through. I followed them. We tumbled out into open water. I kicked for the surface. It seemed miles away. My vision was going black. Just a little further. I broke the surface. Gasp. The air tasted like dust and diesel fumes. But it was air. I thrashed, coughing, wiping the water from my eyes. I was in a reservoir. A massive, underground concrete cistern. Floodlights beamed down from high above. I saw soldiers. Men in hazmat suits running along the catwalks. Contact! Someone shouted. In the intake pool. I dragged myself to the edge of the pool. Vera was there, pulling the teller out. Henderson was vomiting water on the concrete. They were alive. A soldier pointed a rifle at me. Stay down. Contamination check. I lay on my back on the cold concrete. I looked up. There was no sky. Just rock. We were inside the mountain. The metro tunnel had led to the hidden emergency bunkers. I laughed. A wet, ragged, painful laugh. I held up my hand. My glove was gone. My hand was wrinkled, white, shaking. But it was there. Clear! A medic shouted, scanning me with a Geiger counter device. No radiation. No active biologicals. Just heavy chemical burns. The soldier lowered his rifle. He reached out a hand. You're lucky, son, he said. The tunnel collapsed 5 seconds ago. You rode the shock wave out. I took his hand. He hauled me up. I stood there, dripping, ruined, alive.